and beginning with Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin.
Gur Maggart, last can corler. Minister, you'll be aware that thousands of people from Donegal, Mayo, Clare and Sligo have come here to the Centre of Power today and have made their position very clear. This motion follows from the visit of Mary Lou MacDonald to the families in Donegal just over a week ago. And the families said, listen, we're going to be protesting on Tuesday the 15th when the Dáil returns after recess. And we'd ask you to put our case front and centre that day as the leader of the opposition. And that's how this motion came about. This motion reflects the demand of our families in Donegal, Mayo, Clare and Sligo. So, Minister, it calls for 100% redress, 100% fully funded. That's equality for our families in Donegal and Mayo with the families in Dublin and North Leinster. Over 2,000 families in Dublin and North Leinster have availed now the Pyrite remediation scheme, a fully funded scheme, and rightly so. It was fully funded, rightly so. Minister, please, in your comments today, don't make a comparison between the cost for the Pyrite remediation scheme and the cost of the defective concrete block scheme. It's utterly offensive to people. It's the equivalent of two people drowning and one person, you'll say, we're going to save you because you're not too hard on the diesel for the helicopter, but see you far out, we're going to have to let you drown because you can't afford the diesel. It'll be unheard of. So please don't make those comparisons today. Treat people exactly the same. The people that we represent did nothing wrong. They were victims of an era of light touch regulation, self-regulation, no regulation during the Celtic Tiger, just like the families in Dublin and North Leinster, and they're looking to be treated the same. So that's our appeal to you today, Minister. I also want to note the amendments in relation to adding Sligo into the narrative. That's absolutely fine. And the amendment in relation to a public inquiry, again, that's absolutely fine. We wanted to focus our motion on 100% redress, but we welcome the additions from other colleagues here in the House, and we can support those amendments. I also understand, Minister, that the Government will not be opposing this motion. That's welcome news. There are people who are heading home now to Donegal, Mayo, Clare and other counties with hope in their hearts. You know, we also hope that they can get a good night's sleep for the first time in a long time, and indeed we were speaking to those families and many of them said just that. This is a weight of our shoulders that the Government are signing up to a motion that calls for 100% redress. And let's be clear what's happening here tonight. This motion, this is the democratically elected Parliament of the people, and this Parliament will, it appears, pass a motion this evening which is clearly calling for 100% redress. So, Minister, I ask you now to urgently go about the process of implementing the desire, the wishes of this Parliament, to work in partnership with the campaign groups to come to a 100% funded scheme. That people are not out huge amounts of money to make their homes safe. So that's the call, Minister. Minister, I've raised this with you repeatedly over the last year through parliamentary questions, through this forum here. And repeatedly, our requests to review the scheme were put back. It said it was too early, it was too early. I welcome the fact that in recent times you have accepted that this scheme is utterly not fit for purpose. So, as I say, Minister, I welcome the fact that you have agreed not to oppose this motion, that you accept now the desire of our Parliament is for a 100% funded scheme. What we ask you to do is to ensure that you actually implement that urgently, as soon as possible, in partnership with the groups in Donegal, Mayo, and also to add in now the families in Clare and Sligo, and there may be other families that need to be added to this scheme. So that's the challenge tonight, Minister. We want to work with you. I mean, the truth of it is, for every public representative in Donegal, no matter what political party, no matter who, they're all people that know their neighbours, that didn't want this to happen, that want to support them. So I genuinely reach across and I say, let's make this a fully funded scheme. Let's create equality between the East and West of Ireland. Let's work together to get this right and to give people hope and to show those young people who came out today to this protest that when things are wrong, you can stand up, work with the political system and make change. Give people faith, give people belief. That's my appeal to you tonight, Minister. Gurmila Magat.
Gurmaigat ara Jaskin Corley, agus Curran Qualche, Ribbon Jespracht, agus in Jesla Lorcher and Ewer Shaw, Tranona New, Dáil. Ewer te Corishag Motor, Charlie, Fod Machantar Hain, Fod Gunanal, agus Runuri Tea, Getashkriste, the Warren Scannel, Mica, agus Pyrite, agus Shassam Law, Fod, agus Shreslium Law. We ma broader leve in the Hasula in you, Tim with a yaft in the Dáil and Morhule, and the Hastel na meal tigas na meal to Dina, who's doing the Nal, Guji Balakia, and Nis Loya in you. Tashanaya, Gusha, Fuekig Nadini Shaw, Diha Egal, Yed a good seal brushed, agus a net, a goni a gutche, agus a heart go father la Balakia, la glor of a clonchte. Father said him in the he, a genuine play shaw a north, ten the tea shaw a titim as a hille. Agus Kaihar Kodu law, agus Kutu, Kate van Gate, at a cart agus core or Hortifa. I welcome the opportunity to speak this evening on this important motion for homeowners and families that have been devastated by Mica and Pyrite scandal in Mayo, in Clare and in my home county of Donegal. I want to begin by commending the homeowners, but commending the families for their tenacity and for their fortitude. Thousands of them, as we've seen earlier today, came to Dublin. They made that long journey today to send a very clear message to government that the current redress scheme is simply not fit for purpose and immediate action must be taken to right this wrong. I want to extend my sympathy and my solidarity to these homeowners and families. I know this scandal has extracted a heavy toll on many of them, not only financially, but mentally, emotionally, and even physically. That you have mounted such an effective campaign despite these difficulties is testament to your determination, and it should never have come to this. The government must do the right thing now, and they must deliver a 100% redress scheme. I have spoken and heard from families who have experienced the gradual erosion of their homes, the slow creep and growth of cracks along those walls, the falling plaster from the walls and the ceilings onto their children's bedrooms, the crumblings of bricks and gables. Put simply, their homes are falling apart. As one homeowner put it, his home is literally crumbling like Weetabix. And that's not an exaggeration, but a perfect description of their living reality for all of those who have witnessed it. Many of those homes are simply no longer safe, and we know that. I can't describe the impact that this has and continues to have on affected homeowners and their families. They poured their hard-earned money, their savings, their hopes for their future into their homes. On the 15th of June, an 11-year-old from Donegal wrote to the Taoiseach and to the Minister for Housing. I had the pleasure of chatting with her outside today at the demonstration. She's an excellent writer. She expressed the reality that she and her family face eloquently and succinctly. In an extract in that letter, she said, "Our house is affected by Mica. In my bedroom, we had to move my bed because the plaster was falling off my wall and onto my pillows. It's so sad that the house we're living in is crumbling. It's so unfair that the government is doing nothing." Now, for any child, their house should be their sanctuary. The place they feel safe is the place where memories are made. And this scandal has left children growing up in homes that are falling apart and dangerous. Growing up in crumbling surroundings of a scandal that has left their parents stressed, left them distressed and despairing for the future. No child deserves that. No parent, no family. I've heard from parents who find that quiet moment away from the eyes and ears of their children by going for a drive, or maybe sitting in the car and crying under the stress of their ordeal, so as not to alarm or to worry their children. The financial impact, Minister, can't be overstated, but we can describe it. For many families, the homes can no longer be lived in for the fear of the safety of their children. They have had no option but to leave their homes, a devastating and unavoidable decision. Forced to rent as they seek alternative accommodation, mortgage repayments must also be paid on their crumbling homes. They then face the uphill task of accessing the current scheme, which was introduced in 2020. An immediate challenge is the cost for the structural engineering report that is needed to prove eligibility, which itself can cost up to €6,000. That cost, which is considerable, locks many families out of the scheme from the start. Others have sought loans from the banks just to prove that their homes are affected by Mica, as the cracks widen and as the blocks crumble. For those who manage to jump the first hurdle, they face even greater costs as they approach the second one. What is routinely and inaccurately described as a 90% redress scheme in many cases proves to be 70% redress, and often even less. The remaining costs are huge, in some instances upwards of €100,000 and equivalent to a second mortgage. The scheme, Minister, isn't fit for purpose, and there is no debate about that. Unless it is replaced, the repercussions for these families are grave. Equality is also at stake. With homes affected by Pyrite in Dublin and North Leinster having received, rightly, 100% redress through a similar scheme. So let us be honest and let us be frank. Not only can the government put in place a scheme that provides 100% redress to those affected, it must put in place that scheme of 100% redress for those families. This motion calls on the government to provide those affected by defective blocks in Donegal and Mayo and Clare and other counties with 100% redress, nothing less. And that is what is required. And they must ensure that those who are responsible, the developers, the builders, the suppliers, are held to account with a contribution extracted from the industry towards the remediation. I want to finish by commending the homeowners, their families, for their determination, for their fortitude and for their strength. And I call on every TD to support this motion. And Minister, I call on you to act. Do not give false hope where there's none. Give a commitment today, what your party leader refused to do, to support the principle of 100%, to support the principle of equality, and please lift that burden off these families that are so weighed down by this nightmare that they've been living on for so many years.
Violet and Wynne.
I welcome the opportunity to advocate for this bill that my party have put forward on what can only be described as a hard situation for any homeowner to suffer. Locally, the Clare, Pyrite, Mica Action Group gathered and protested in Ennis yesterday. I attended that protest and spoke to some of the people who have been affected by defective blocks and who have literally watched their homes and their sense of future, security and shelter crumble before their eyes over the past few years because of light touch regulations during the construction boom. I want to commend the chairperson, Dr. Martina Cleary, and all of the members who, even in their despair, mobilised themselves and done great work on this issue, and during the restrictions also, it must be noted. These people whose hard-earned money was invested into their homes have been denied any clarity about who, if anyone, would accept responsibility for the state-sponsored shoddy workmanship that has led to nationwide scandal. In my county of Clare, a relatively small initial sample of only just 5 houses has been tested and have proven that it's pyrite. Even more worrying is the fact that the initial sample included homes scattered at 5 far-flung locations across the county, which has led people to suspect that the issue is widespread and far-reaching. 5, however, when we know that more than 50 houses have come forward. These houses were built between 1981 and 2007, and since then we know that 55 houses have been logged as having defective blocks, and a further 35 have more recently been identified. Now let us consider the backdrop against which these constituents' concerns were rising. The initial scheme, which included only homeowners in Donegal and Mayo, was only offering 90% of redress costs, and it has come to light that they are not even receiving the 90% and are burdened with, in some cases, up to 30% of the cost. This is absolute madness, especially considering that this was not the experience for those homeowners on the east side. The government in Dublin simply has not been listening and have not been getting the message. The scheme on closer inspection is not fit for purpose. The scheme in its current form excludes the most vulnerable homeowners impacted, as it expects homeowners to be able to come up with the 10% of the overall reconstruction cost from the outset. These homeowners bought or built their homes in good faith and should not be liable for the cost of remediation caused by the incompetency, negligence or deliberate non-compliance of others. End of. Now imagine you've invested your life saving in a big beautiful house at the tail end of the Celtic Tiger and ended up taking out a mammoth mortgage to secure this forever home. Now imagine that the walls are starting to fall down around you 10 years down the line, and imagine you have to move out because this building, the very security of a roof over your head, is no longer safe to raise your family in, and we are in the midst of a housing crisis. Imagine that your county isn't even included in the approved areas that will be able to recoup the devastating costs of this structural damage, and not only will you have to fight tooth and nail for recognition that your home is actually part of a much wider network of buildings that need significant reconstruction, but you are also being asked to come up with 10% of the overall cost on top of your mortgage repayments for a building you technically can't even occupy, on top of the rental of an alternative premises. Sinn Féin's bill, on the other hand, is putting forward policy that will offer 100% redress for all homeowners of defective block houses, regardless of location, without the unrealistic expectation of them to come up with the sum of the cost themselves. Homeowners are not to blame, and they should not be footing even part thereof of the bill.
To conclude.
To all the people who travelled to Dublin today to protest against the lack of action on their cause and brought their protest to their capital city. I am delighted to speak on the Sinn Féin motion, because wherever a dodgy block is sold, wherever big bucks are to be made on the backs of a home buyer or the home builder or worker, redress and immediate redress is required. Full and immediate is the only way to address the wrongs inflicted, the damage done to people living with the effects of the greed that characterises housing in Ireland. Not only in Donegal, this matters everywhere. It matters in North Kildare, it matters in Mayo, it matters in Clare, wherever damage shows its ugly face. This damage is not just to buildings, but to families, communities, mental health, financial health, and people's sense of feeling safe in their own homes. Homes they built, bought and paid for, and through no fault of their own are disintegrating around them. It is not just Mica or Pyrite that caused this crisis, but it's the housing culture, its greed, its dysfunction, its lack of respect for the citizen. A culture where builders, developers and politicians took one of the most basic and powerful human needs we have, the need for home, and reduced it to a commodity, to a scheme for profit, to the regulation of whatever you're having yourself, where big bucks could be made and corners cut, along with deals with the boom is getting boomier devil. They say bad housing is designed and built by people who know they will never have to live in it. But dangerous housing, the soul-destroying housing of Mica and Pyrite, was given to us by the statewide housing culture of "sure, look it, we'll get away with it." And they did. With their shoddy materials, their worse work, their shocking finish, people lined up to hand over their life savings for the privilege of a 30-year mortgage. For years now, at our Ardeshna, comrades from Mayo, Clare and Donegal in particular have shared their stories with us about what light touch regulation and the devastation it brought to their lives. And over the years, skirting boards, tiles, lights, wooden presses, slates, doors just falling in around them, along with their spirits, their marriages, their bank balances and their peace of mind. So Sinn Féin tonight we call for the full redress for the families affected here, and we must cast a cold eye on the housing culture then, and by large the same housing culture now. The absence of a philosophy of housing beyond markets and profit is destroying our state and destroying our society. It gives us penthouses alongside tent cities, cheek by jowl. Parents and children living on takeaways and their nerves in B&Bs. Mica and Pyrite are simply a symptom. They're a symptom of a social and political disease where there is no respect for the citizen. Profit is venerated and citizens exploited. The only cure is new thinking and a new government. And in Sinn Féin we have that thinking, and when the people decide, we will be that government. But families affected can't wait another second. I'm pleased that you're not going to vote against our motion, but I would ask you to support it and thereby supporting our people. We must mind all our people, whatever county they live in, and not abandon them. In housing, the people out there must know that the people in here are on their side.
Deputy Louise O'Reilly is sharing her time with Deputy Darren O'Rourke and Deputy Desi Ellis.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important PMB this evening. I know that there are many people watching this evening whose houses have been affected by the Mica scandal, and I want to pledge to them my solidarity and that of Sinn Féin. There will also be people from North County Dublin whose houses have been affected by pyrite and apartments by defects who will be watching this too. I want to reassure them that we stand with them. The Mica Pyrite and apartment defects scandals are a legacy of the light touch building regulation which has existed in this state for far too long. Indeed, as we see reduced sizes for apartments in recent years and the sanctioning of co-living, I am reminded that this light touch regulation still exists. It's as if we have learned nothing. Across North County Dublin, in places like Lusk and Rush, in particular, but also, Minister, and you'll be aware of this elsewhere in North County Dublin, houses have been literally destroyed by pyrite, while apartments have been crippled by latent defects. There are those whose houses are undergoing remediation, but there are others who cannot sell their houses because they have pyrite in the infill, and while it's not affecting the structure, they can't get a cert to verify this. And these are people who would have bought what traditionally would be known as starter homes and are now outgrowing those homes, but they're stuck where they are and their lives are in limbo. And Minister, I would urge you to take a look at this situation, and I would be very happy to work with you in relation to it. I have constituents, and they're constituents of yours as well, Minister, who have emigrated because of this, because they were trapped in their home. They felt they had no option. They've let their houses out and they have emigrated. To see your own home reduced to rubble, to be condemned, to be unsafe for your kids or for your grandkids to be in is just shocking. And that's before we even mention the hundreds of thousands of euros that people have spent just trying to keep their homes right. But for the root cause of this to be the provision of defective blocks from quarries, which I'm told is the case in Donegal, these people are still operating. And that must be absolutely infuriating, just the same as it is for our constituents, Minister, who see the builders who built their homes getting away scot-free, and now they're building new developments just across the road. Imagine how heartbreaking that must be for people. I want to commend the strength and the dignity of those people affected in Donegal and Mayo for how they've conducted themselves throughout their campaign. They are a credit to their county, to their families. They are an example for all of those people who have been wronged as to what can be done if people pull together with a common cause and indeed with a stated common aim. I've seen the same strength across North County Dublin with those who have campaigned for redress for the victims of pyrite and those who have been affected by the latent defects scandal. The legacy of light touch regulation is being felt in family homes across the state. And while it's not right to compare schemes, and we shouldn't do that, the experience for families is scarily similar. Lying in bed at night, listening to your house crumbling around you, that is the experience that these families have had. The impact on the lives of the residents is scarily similar. And I commend the people of Donegal, and indeed I commend this motion. And Minister, I would ask you not simply to not oppose the Sinn Féin motion, but to actively support it.
Deputy Darren O'Rourke.
Ceann Comhairle. And I too want to commend Deputy McLaughlin and Deputy Doherty for bringing forward this motion. I think it's timely and it's very important. And I want to extend my solidarity to the people of Donegal who came in such great numbers today, and everything that they have gone through to fight their corner. It's clear that the scheme that is in place is not fit for purpose. The experience of, as Deputy O'Reilly said, the experience of investing in building, in creating your own home with, full of hope for the future and plans for the future, only to see that literally crumble around you is devastating. And I don't know any of the people involved, but I can see from the footage and from speaking to people today, I know what it means to them, and I know from the experience of my constituents in Meath East, in particular areas like Ashbourne and Dunboyne and Dunshaughlin, who've lived with pyrite and who've fought their own battle and taken it to the High Court and failed at the High Court and gone the political route for a scheme to be put in place with them. I'm sure every one of them would say that it needs to be a 100% scheme. The scheme needs to be fit for purpose. It's no addition if people cannot get on the first step of the ladder in relation to it, if they can't get access to it. I draw a comparison as well in terms of the cost of the initial test, as it appears to be in Donegal, versus the visual test for the pyrite scheme. It is quite obvious the damage that is done. I think as well, to follow up on Deputy O'Reilly's points, there's a number of issues that are still outstanding in terms of the pyrite scheme. I know from dealing with people in my own constituency, issues in terms of estates where pyrite is only now becoming apparent after the deadline of December 2013. I know one particular case where a lady encouraged her mum to buy the house next door for practical reasons, only for it to now have pyrite and for them to have to appeal and go into the process. It is a difficulty. I know there is an issue in terms of the caps on the rent, and I think if the scheme in Donegal, it needs to include that element of supporting the rent, but also there's a pressure on people to move out after the money is used, and that relates. The concerns I'm hearing from people is that they almost have to take it or leave it in terms of the quality of the work that has been done. They have no call back in relation to it. They find themselves in a difficult position. So there are a number of elements that need to be resolved with the pyrite scheme, and that I would encourage you to look at, Minister. Deputy O'Reilly and others addressed the specific root cause that is still there for pyrite, for mica, all across the country, and that needs to be addressed. I commend the motion, and again thank the deputies for bringing it forward.
Now to wrap up this important debate, Deputy Rose Conway Walsh is sharing with Deputy Owen O'Brien.
Garmagad Concorla, and at the outset I want to commend all those who travelled to the protest today, particularly from my own county of Mayo. And I think the unity between Donegal and Mayo over the years has been extraordinary. I know it's many years ago since myself and my colleague Pádraig McLaughlin raised this issue in the Seanad when nobody would listen. I want to commend the work of the action committees. These are my neighbours and my friends, and these are people that I know. And these are the people who are worn out by how they've been treated by the last government and by this government. In particular, I suppose, I hear the Minister name-checking all of his colleagues. I want to name-check just a couple of people. And one is Josephine Murphy, and the other is Dorothy Kane, who have fought for years in trying to get this scheme in place, because when we discovered pyrite first in Mayo, it was in the main confined to the Erris area. And those two people in particular, with some other people like Michael Healy and all that, fought for years for a scheme to be put in place. It is absolutely amazing that these people aren't looking for compensation. All they are looking for is to have their homes reinstated. And Lauren and Jamie Lee, who have taken up the case in Ballina, and the other members of the action group there, I commend them as well. I mean, I talked to a man the other day. He described to me how a bat came in through his house. We have watched this over the years. We have watched the cracks widened, and we have watched government throw their hands in the air and then come along with a take it or leave it scheme. And that was the situation these homeowners were in with the 90-10, so-called 90-10 scheme. It was take it or leave it. And it was almost like the government wanted them to turn around and say, well, we're not taking it. And then they'd say, well, we offered you this, and turn their backs again. And Minister, I want to know, what part of 100% do you not understand? And I know the people today were very polite and they were mannerly, as the people in the North West are. But please don't mistake that for a weakness, because something has happened within the West and the unity within the West that we are not taking this anymore. We don't begrudge the people on the East the scheme, the 100% scheme. They deserved it too. But why should we be treated different just because we're on the west coast of this island, which happens time and time again? Well, enough is enough, and we're not taking it anymore. Those responsible for the scheme, those responsible for what happened here, including government and light touch regulation, have scarpered. The insurance industry, the banks and the suppliers, they all disappeared. Because, you see, they're used to dealing with governments who don't hold them to account. They're used to dealing with governments who are that close to them that they don't have to be held to account. That has to stop, Minister, and it has to stop now. I saw time and time again in the Finance Committee, whether it be the tracker mortgages, the insurance companies, whatever it is, that has to stop. The government is here to protect people and to protect people's livelihoods. Just because people have made applications to this scheme does not mean that people accepted that it's okay. It is clearly not fit for purpose. When we look at the scheme, we look at the issues like the accommodation, the windows and doors and the energy. And I hear what you're saying, Minister, and I hear what the government colleagues are saying. And they are, you know, empathising with people. We need to go out of here this week to assure the people of Mayo and Donegal and Sligo and Clare and Limerick that they are going to get 100% redress. I'm very proud to be from County Mayo, and I'm proud of the people who came here today. We are fighting back, and it is your responsibility to end this nightmare for them. When you say active consideration is not going to build any houses. It is not going to put to right the wrongs that have been done here. So I'm asking you, Minister, please do not mince the words. Please ask your Taoiseach and your Taoiseach to come out, to agree with the TDs who have spoken here tonight, and to tell people and to instruct the local authorities to tell them these are the changes that are going to be made to the scheme so that these houses can be reinstated. It is not only the houses that are crumbling, it is people's lives. I have witnessed it for myself. Their physical and their mental health has deteriorated. It is not right that has happened here. Is this what the people in 1916 died for, to have citizens treated like this? Thank you,
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Cian Corla. And I have to say, I was very proud to stand in full support of people of Donegal, of Sligo, of Mayo, of Clare, and indeed there are many supporters here in Dublin, often also living in defective Celtic Tiger era apartments, calling for justice. Now, many speakers have rightly commented that in fact it is 8 long years that these families have been living with defective block. 2013, the expert panel on Mica identified as the date in which pyritic block and mica block was first discovered. 8 long years these families have been living with this scandal. In 2017, the expert panel brought this to light and highlighted the action that should be taken. Only a few months later, the Oireachtas Housing Committee unanimously endorsed the Safest Houses report, calling for a redress scheme for all those affected by Celtic Tiger latent defects. And yet it wasn't until 2020 that a scheme was even put in place for which people would only be able to draw down money this year. I'm not going to repeat the comments of nearly everybody who has spoken today, other than to emphasise the scheme in front of us, available to families today in Donegal and in Mayo, and hopefully into the future in Sligo, Clare and elsewhere, is simply not fit for purpose. Anybody who thought asking a family to pay €7,000 for an engineer's report to get entry to a scheme didn't understand the scale of the problem. And whether it is 10% or 20% or 30%, these families should not have to pay for defects that they didn't create. Equally, they shouldn't have to pay for the storage and the accommodation costs while remediation is taking place. So, the one loud, clear demand from the streets of Dublin today and from this chamber is 100% redress and nothing less. We also need to understand that there are also many council properties affected. That means council tenants living in defective properties, and separate to the changes that I hope that emerge from the short review of this defective block scheme, local authorities, wherever they are, also need to be given the funding to ensure their tenants are not living in defective properties. And there's been some talk about whether we should compare different schemes, and of course different schemes are different in detail, but the core principle has to be the same. If you are living in a property with defects in the ground, in the block, in the fire safety, or in any other aspect of construction, you should not have to pay. One of the core principles on which the Safest Houses report was agreed, again cross-party, ordinary owners who purchased in good faith should not be liable for the costs of remediation caused by the incompetence, negligence or deliberate non-compliance of others. It is not their fault. They should not have to put their hands in their pockets. I also want to say that I have some concerns with a separate issue, but that runs in parallel to this. Minister O'Brien set up a group to explore the issue of defective buildings. They've met a number of times this year. They're due to have a report to the Minister by the summer to feed into another remediation scheme for those with fire safety and structural defects in time for Budget 2022. My understanding is the work of that working group is very delayed. It may not meet its target deadline of a report to government this summer, and therefore there may not be any redress of any kind for Celtic Tiger defects, whether in Dublin, in Clare or elsewhere, and that would simply be unconscionable. So I'm urging the Minister not only to complete the time-bound review in 6 weeks or less to ensure 100% redress, but also to ensure the separate working group on building defects concludes its work as a matter of urgency in time for Budget 2022 to ensure that the thousands of homeowners living today in fire safety or fire defective apartments and duplexes, or those with water ingress, are also given the right to 100% redress. I have to say, and to emphasise a point of all of my colleagues, I thought while today's demonstration was determined, there was also a clear underlying anger. 8 years is too long, and it's not what people say in this chamber here tonight, it's what they do in the days and weeks that come after us. And if anybody thinks that they can come out of that review with anything less than 100% redress, there will be multiples more people marching in the streets in Dublin in the future, and they will continue to have Sinn Féin's support. So I am absolutely delighted to support the initiative of my colleagues, Deputies Doherty, McLaughlin, Conway Walsh and others. And I urge all others not just to support it, but let's make 100% redress and nothing less a reality in the weeks ahead. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Brien. Now that concludes our consideration of the motion. We must first turn our attention to amendment number 2 in the name of Deputy Peadar Tobin of the Regional Group. Is that amendment agreed? Agreed. And amendment number 1 is in the name of Deputy Marion Harkin of the Independent Group. I take it that that amendment is also agreed.
Agreed.
And finally, the motion as amended. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you all and congratulations.